Time has begun, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We had a pretty lengthy introduction last week, introducing some of the characters. So for those who are new, we're primarily studying through the book of Ecclesiastes, but there's two different speakers in history who have had a lot to say about the topic of happiness and meaning of life. And this has also just been a way to kind of pique the interest of some of my secular Facebook friends. We had several last week. I don't know if they'll be showing up again this week or not. But one of whom is Aristotle, and he's a Greek philosopher. And the other of whom is Pascal. You can see it there. Pascal was a French scientist, philosopher, mathematician, just wore a bunch of hats. So they both have a lot of, they both have a lot of really interesting things to say. So anyway, I'm not going to go into a full discussion there, but I want to just start with a fun discussion question, which to me is part of the fun of Ecclesiastes. It brings up so many great questions. I want you to think, on the topic of happiness, think about what makes you happy. Okay, what would be kind of your perfect idealized world? That thing that makes you happy. Okay, now imagine there's kind of a British style phone booth, one of those red ones where you turn the knob and you open the door and get in. Okay, and if you step into this phone booth, you will immediately be absorbed into this world of yours that makes you happy. But the stipulation is you can never leave and you can only have that. Okay, so just think about it for a second. There's, what is it that makes you happy? It's right there in a phone booth. If you step in the phone booth, you will have what you think makes you happy, but you can never leave the phone booth. You are stuck in the phone booth after that. Would you get in or not? And why?
Well, I would say if I had my kids and grandkids and food, but I don't know if I would step in or not. And for that, if I knew I had to stay in there forever, I love them all, but I don't know. But I would definitely step in. I'm just teasing.
So you would step in?
Yeah.
Okay. Any
I'd
other?
I'd probably step in because I don't mind being by myself.
Is that is by yourself your happiest idealized world?
Well, now it is. Yeah. I mean, I've been by myself so long that, yeah.
All right.
Live by myself. I like to be around people, but not here. Not living here.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else? Would you step in the phone booth or would you stay out?
No, won't step in.
You would step in?
No, I won't.
Why not?
Because, it's not your surroundings which make you happy or unhappy. I think it's your attitude. You can have everything and you can still not be happy. So, just by stepping into a phone booth where you think things might make you happy, is not going to make you happy if you already are not happy.
And to add to that line of thinking, I would actually even take it a step further to say that, let's say those things did make you happy. That doesn't mean that they would keep you, because you have an option to not be able to leave that. So sometimes the absence of something that makes you happy makes you long for. And so it would wear away. It wouldn't be lasting.
Well, I think I said something last week. I think if you can be happy for a while, but not content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think if you're content doing something, then it would be better. You might being happy. You're not always content. I don't think.
Jeff, would you get in the box or no?
You're talking to me?
Yeah.
Well, my box is a box that doesn't have me in it, so if I got in it, it would ruin it.
Okay. Fair enough. I'm gonna
My middle daughter here says the thing in her box would be heaven, so she'd definitely jump in.
jump in. Okay.
Church answer.
It's interesting to think
Sorry.
about, what.
I mean, it didn't say heaven, it says New Jerusalem, but okay.
Say that again, Sarah. Sounds like Sarah.
Say it, Sarah.
Technically, it's the New Jerusalem, not heaven. So, like, when there's like no more person, I'll get to hold God's hand.
You have a mute button over there, Jeff. You can just mute anytime. Yeah, I think those of us who are afraid to get in the box, a lot of it comes down to sort of our cynicism about happiness. The idea of, okay, I think deep down, all these little things in our life that we think will make us happy don't necessarily make us happy. And I think we probably have experienced that at some point or another. Emily, what about you? Would you get in the box or no?
No, I wouldn't get in the box.
Why wouldn't you get in the box?
Because I would know that that's not real. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, the perfect dream is not better than a messed up reality. Just muting herself out of the conversation. All right, Ashley, what about you? Do you get in the box or no?
I can't unmute myself. No, I don't think I would get in the box.
Why not?
I don't know. It stresses me out thinking about getting in a box. And only choosing one thing. I would have decision paralysis. And like we kind of talked about this last week, but just with happiness being fleeting, like what makes me happy then, and then in comparison too, if everything else is taken away, then maybe that wouldn't make me happy because that's all that I have left. So then what would I have to compare it to? I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I think our happiness also matures or changes over time. When I was a kid, a bag of candy made me happy. Now a bag of candy makes me sick. But you also brought up something interesting. How do you know happiness if you don't know sadness, in contrast? All right, who hasn't gone? Raj, Val, Donna,
Melody.
She's sitting quietly on Tatooine. You get in the box or no? There's perfect happiness and bliss, but you only get one thing, and you can't leave the box.
So what was the question again?
It's like a phone booth that you can get in or not get in. But if you get in, you can't leave. But if you go inside the phone booth, whatever it is that makes you happy, you will have for forever.
I get it.
You get in?
Yeah, I don't have that FOMO mentality. I get it. Yep.
All right. Donna, what about you?
Definitely not, because like you said, happiness changes practically daily, I think.
Yeah.
Well, this is considering that you're in the right type of happiness, right? Like the good happiness, the fulfilling happiness, the hypothetical fulfilling happiness you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Or is it like any happiness?
Well, I mean, it's your box. You get to define it.
If you're in there, you wouldn't be by yourself because you have a telephone, right?
All right, Raj. What about you? I'm drawing you out of the silence. Would you get in the box or no? Are you there? We can barely make you out.
Okay, hold on. Okay, I'll join the. Hello? Can you hear? Anyone can hear? Or maybe mine?
It sounds like you're in a bubble.
Raj is already in the box.
Yeah. I think she's saying, I'm driving through a tunnel.
Yeah.
All right. I don't know if you're on your phone or on a computer, but we can't really make out what you're saying, Raj. Okay, so there are probably multiple common wisdoms that we could talk about, but I want to bring up three today because those are going to be what we're studying in Ecclesiastes. So the first element of common wisdom, and by common I just mean kind of secular wisdom, worldly wisdom, pop wisdom, things that everyone feels are true or should be true. So common wisdom number one is that true success should lead to happiness. If I'm successful, I should be happy, right? This feels like a fairly common belief in our culture. Common wisdom number two that you see very common in our culture is more consumption or self-indulgence should lead to happiness. So if I want something, I should get it. I should get a lot of it. I should get it now, even before I'm ready or before I can afford it or whatever. But like I should have it, and that'll make me happy. Item number three is work and production should lead to happiness. So in human understanding, people who aren't happy, they think, well, I'm not happy because I don't have enough money. I'm suffering some kind of lack. I'm not happy because I'm not very successful in my job, or I'm not in a job where I can be successful, where my talents and my skills can be maximized. They think, well, I'm not very successful in other areas, or I'm not very popular in other areas, and so that's why I'm not happy. So then the reverse is, well, if I had those things, then I'd be happy. And so today's text, we're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and the 1 in chapter 2. This is the first case study that Solomon conducts. And so he does, I think, 11 of these, if I've counted right. He does 11 different case studies. And so case studies are a way to set some parameters around some social phenomenon as a researcher. And so he's playing the part of a researcher, and I'll show you what his research premise is. So researchers, they set some parameters around a particular study that they want to do, some kind of social or cultural phenomena, and then they observe, and sometimes they participate, and then they write about their conclusions and their observations, and they try to draw out some principles and lessons that they've learned and some things to apply. And so that's what's happening here for Solomon. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Screen share. There we go. All right, so you should be able to see my Bible there. Close that down. There we go. So we had just finished kind of the intro to it, and so I want to set us up for this next chapter. So he says in verse 12, he said, I, the teacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and by wisdom all that is undone under heaven with a heavy burden. What a heavy burden God has laid on men. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless and chasing after the wind. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I thought to myself, look, I have grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to understanding of wisdom and also to madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. So in this passage, he's got his kind of thesis statement. And there's a couple things I want to point out about that. That's in verse 13. So verse 13, all right, we've got a different set of people here, so I'm going to use ESV. So in verse 13, he says, I applied my heart to seek. And so that might seem really weird, and in our culture that could really be misunderstood because in our culture, the heart, we associate the heart with emotions. We associate the heart with love. Cross-culturally, though, this isn't always true. Cross-culturally, different cultures associate different body parts with different feelings, right? So we associate the head thinking and cognition, the heart with feeling and emotion. But in other cultures, such as this one, the heart is actually, or sometimes the bowels, is where they see the seat of emotion or the seat of logic. And so for him, he's really saying, I set out to study this in a hard way. So the first thing is we see his kind of intention, his study purpose is, I devoted myself, I applied my heart. That's his whole thing, is I'm using my logic and my understanding to evaluate what I'm about to set out. And number 2 is his method. He's going to study and explore. So this is what he's doing. Number 3 is the scope. Everything done under the heaven. Okay? So to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. So this is the purpose statement of the book, if you will. And this is what he's about to spend the next several chapters describing, is he's going to show you, he's going to kind of show his work. I remember in math class, my teacher always didn't want me just to write down the answer. He wanted me to show my work for my math that I did. And so that's what Solomon's going to do. He's going to show his work. So one more thing before we move on to the next thing is he's qualified. He says his qualifications. Honestly, if you write a dissertation, you do kind of a preamble to your dissertation, which says, here's what I'm setting out to do. Here's how I'm going to do it. Here's the parameters of my research. And here's what my qualifications are and my background of interest in this topic. And so he does the same thing. In verse 14, he says, I have seen everything that is done under the sun. So he's making a bold claim that with his position as being the king of Jerusalem, with all of his status, power, wealth, etc., that he has access to see everything that's ongoing in his kingdom. And then in verse 16, he reiterates as a second way, I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has gained experience of wisdom and knowledge. So here he's saying these, I'm the researcher, and these are my qualifications. So this is the purpose of his book and what he's going to do and how he's going to go about doing it. So what I want us to do is we are going to break up into 3 groups. So in a moment, you're going to see a little notification come up on your screen which says, join the breakout room. And so I'm going to put you in smaller groups, and each group, because we're taking kind of a larger passage of scripture for this particular lesson, we're doing things together. In this particular one, each of you will have a passage where he has an experiment. And so Solomon is experimenting with 3 different things in this first section. He is experimenting with pleasure. This is in chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. So from this point forward, we'll be in chapter 2. So chapter 2, 1 through 11, his first experiment is pleasure. Will pleasure produce the happiness that he seeks, the meaning that he seeks, or not? Experiment number 2 is wisdom, and that's in verse 12 to 16. And then experiment number 3 is folly. So he just said, I'm a researcher, and his whole job is he's trying to prove it's true by making it false. So how can I find happiness? I'm going to fail and fail and fail until I find it, is basically what he's doing in this book. Number 1, I want to know, how did he actually conduct the experiment? What are the things that he looked at? So read the text, look at how he conducted the experiment. What did he experience? What did he try out? And then number 2, what is the report? So in each of the ones, each of these sections, he goes, hey, here's what I did. And then he goes, but I found this to be, okay. And then he gives a report. But the main thing is I want to know why. What does this prove? So the third item is, what is his logic for his report? How does he support his conclusions? So, I mean, imagine everybody around us says, man, work, money, and pleasure, these are the holy trinity of American culture. And these are the things that will make you happy. And if you're not happy, it's because you should just double down into those. And we would answer back and say, well, no, we don't really think those are the ultimate meaning. And they'd say, yeah, prove it. And so Solomon's doing the same thing where he's saying, look, I tried this one, I tried this one, I tried this one. And now we need to ask him, hey, prove it. So how did he live the experiment? What did he report were his findings? And then what was the logic, or what is the basis for his findings? Because he has a reason for each of them. And then I mentioned those elements of common wisdom. So let's try to pair those up with which element of common wisdom is he contradicting? All right, do we have everybody back? All right, welcome back, everybody. Okay, so group number 1, the pleasure room. How did that go? What did you learn?
I like that.
Do you want to call it something different, Brian?
No,
I was like, I like that we're called the pleasure room.
I'm the czar
I
of
was on a
naming
call
things.
with Brian the other night where he was talking about the marriage room.
That was Jessica Clark talking about the marriage room. I just asked the nature of what she was saying.
Okay, so yeah, so for pleasure or self-indulgence, how did he live the experiment? It says in verse 10, he kind of sums it up and says, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. For my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. So whatever he saw, whatever he desired, he didn't hold back. He embraced all of those things. And some of the things that we noticed in that was that a lot of the things, it wasn't just the typical things that you think pleasure, good food, sex, drugs, whatever. It's not just the typical things that we consider that bring pleasure. He also talked about, I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks. And so this creating and building things, he also did that. So, so he was also working to provide these things that would bring him pleasure. And he also said, Jeff also made the point that he made a couple of points where he still brought his wisdom with him. And so, if you drink and drink and drink until you're passed out somewhere, one could argue that's not really pleasure. So he kept, he was smart about it. He drank enough to bring him pleasure, but he still had his wisdom to know, well, if we're indulged, this isn't pleasure anymore. So that's how he conducted the experiment. His report of the meaning of it was, it's all meaningless. It's all vanity. It's striving after wind. And the logic of that is there's nothing to be gained from it. So, I've done all these things. I haven't held back anything for myself, any pleasure. I've just embraced it. I've worked hard to provide all of these things for myself, all of these things that are going to bring me great pleasure. And there was nothing to be gained under all of that. And then the elements of common wisdom, he's contradicting, we said the second two, more consumption and self-indulgence should lead to happiness, and that work and production should lead to happiness, because neither of those things brought him.
Pleasure is an interesting topic in Christian circles historically, and currently for that matter. And historically, actually, their views on pleasure came out of Plato and Aristotle and some of the early Greek philosophers, and they had this notion that matter was evil. And when you think matter is evil and life is meaningless, then you either become ascetic. Can't say it. I keep saying aesthetic. Ascetic. Ascetic is where you deny all pleasures, or you become very libertine. Well, obviously, being libertine and just enjoying pleasure is the way more fun of those two. So that's typically where they go. But Aristotle and some of the other Greeks talked about pleasure as a good. So think of good with like a capital G. And what they mean by that is a good is like this concept that's outside of this world, and it's bigger than the individual applications, right? So there's like capital F fun. So like, sports might be fun, but that's simply a kind of fun or a way in which you experience fun. Games with friends might be fun, or a movie might be, these individual things might be fun, but what is the big idea of fun? So the question that Aristotle asks is pleasure a good? Is it something that can be sought in and of itself? And so at his time, he said that people had three positions on pleasure. Number one, all pleasure is wrong, which of course we still have that group today. Two, some pleasures are good, but most are bad. So that's more like your middle of the road Baptist approach. And then number three is that pleasures are good, but they're not the ultimate good. And so he would say they're not the ultimate good because you seek pleasure for something else. You never seek pleasure as an end in and of itself. Here's a really good quote where he talks about, and I think this applies very much to our culture, because you made a good distinction, or your group made a good distinction about there's a difference between, there's many kinds of pleasures, not just bodily pleasure, right? There's the pleasure of work and seeing your projects come to fruition and that kind of thing. So he says the bodily pleasures have taken over the category of pleasure because most people often aim at them and they share in them. So since these are the only pleasures that they know, people suppose that they are the only pleasures that exist. And so even in Aristotle's time, he was saying, hey, there's more to life than just bodily pleasures. I think with each of these terms like happiness and pleasure, there's obviously trite forms of these where pain and pleasure would be opposed to each other. But do you agree with the idea that pain and pleasure are opposed to each other? Anybody? It's not a trick.
I think necessarily, because I know there are times where, and maybe this is a simple example, but there are times where I just need to cry and I need to allow myself to have those feelings, kind of a catharsis for things. And usually, a lot of times I really needed that. And so while it might be painful at the time to think about, something pain or, to have this sadness, ultimately, I feel better when I come out of it because it's very cathartic and it's a release, I think.
A runner who does a marathon is in pain, but there's a pleasure when you finish.
Yeah.
So I think as we're thinking through, understanding Solomon and understanding Aristotle and Pascal, we're talking about generations where words have oftentimes changed meanings, words like happiness and or pleasure. And when we're speaking of it in today's world, we typically speak in the very trite form. And I think Solomon did a very valid experiment where, he mentions, hey, I tried to cheer my body with wine. So he doesn't pull any punches there. He names what he's trying out. But then he also mentions, gardens and community improvement and things that we would think, hey, these are really valuable, lofty goals in life. But ultimately, his conclusion is that they are worthless. Okay, group number 2, experiments in work and folly. What did y'all learn?
So your first question was, how did he conduct the experiment? And basically, he was just talked about his experience and his knowledge, just his own observations. This was his conclusion. This is what he observed. And number 2, what is the report? What he decided between wisdom and knowledge was that it didn't matter whether you were wise or a fool, because in the end, you were forgotten and you died. Whether you were wise or foolish, you died. So that it didn't matter. And number 3, which element of what is the logic for the report? His logic was that even though there was more gain in wisdom than in foolishness, and there's more gain in light in darkness, but in the end, the same event happens to them. And that it's all vanity.
Mhm.
And that we all die anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So which of the common wisdoms is he contradicting here?
Well, we weren't sure about that. Mostly we thought it was number 1. It applied to number 1 the most.
Yeah. So I love there's a couple of really funny verses. I mean, he's talking about these really dark topics, but there's kind of a bit of humor that he's employing. In verse 15, he says, "Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why have I been so very wise? You know, what is the point of my wisdom if like my grave and the fool's grave are side by side?" Yeah, and then he reiterates this again in 16. He says, "How the wise dies just like the fool." So ultimately, everything comes back to we all die. Okay, group number 3.
All right. So we had emptiness of work, and as far as the questions are concerned, how did he live the experiment? First couple verses, he says that he toils under the sun. We brought up the fact that he is a king, and so we kind of questioned whether or not that was physical labor out in the fields, if you will, or if it was even just work, like I guess kingly duties, if you will. And so either way, he actually did work, whatever that may translate to. And so he actually did go through with the work. It doesn't really clarify that. And then his reporting of the meaning of the experiment is that it's futile, it's useless, it's useless. And the logic behind that was actually, to me, interesting, because he the first thing he goes to is in verse 19. He says, "And who knows whether the person?" I guess 18 says, "I labored under the sun because I must leave it to the one who comes after me." And 19 says, "Who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will take all my work that I labored at skillfully under the sun." So the next guy up is going to take over. And so who cares about my work and how good it was and what that meant or what that looked like? And so the uselessness of it came not from necessarily just the work itself, at least initially, that it actually comes from the fact that the next someone else is going to take it up. Then later in the verses, he goes on to say that there is sorrowfulness, and I think grief is the word that are used. Yeah, grief and sorrowfulness also comes with the work as well. So even the work in and of itself, while you're doing it, produces those things. So that's the logic behind it. And then we came to agree that the element of common wisdom that it's contradicting, the third one, which is work and production, should lead to happiness. Kind of interpreting this for in a way that's work for the sake of working. So like, workaholics, busybodies, just simply staying active, or maybe for us, posting on social media, make it look like we're active because we know that that's a valuable thing. And it should be coveted to even seem as though I'm too busy to take that call, despite the fact that I'm not supposed to go into work anymore. So like, things like even the appearance in our culture, even the appearance of being busy is valuable, and we cherish that. And so I guess he's contradicting and saying that that's actually useless.
Yeah. You hit on something that important, that category of workaholism. And I think that brings up something that each of these, we'll use Pascal's word, we'll use diversions. Each of these different categories of diversions is used to supplement or to transplant over this void in our lives. There's this sense of emptiness and meaninglessness that clearly Solomon's struggling with. I think at a human level, we probably all struggle with the same kinds of things. You know, we were reading this as a family, and Solomon's talking about there's nothing new under the sun, and what's already been done is going to happen again. And I had each one in the family say, what's something that you do repetitively that the moment you're done, it still has to be redone. And it was things like laundry, lawn mowing, paying
Dusting.
bills. You know, like the money comes in, and the moment it's in, it's already designated, and it's out the door within minutes. Somebody said dusting, I heard. Yeah, so there's all these things that create this repetition that kind of cover the emptiness, and work is certainly one of those. And I would say in our culture, work is a huge issue, where we can take so much pride in the work that we do. We value things like a good work ethic. We look down on people that are lazy or sloppy, and at the same time, that doesn't fill the void, particularly in a time like right now, where work is either shut down, people are furloughed temporarily or semi-permanently, people have been laid off entirely. Even if they have a job, they're working from home, or just that sense of, you know, prominence that you might have walking through the office and everybody know that you've got the title that you've got, you know, like that doesn't really carry in a time like this. And so that sense of identity and purpose and meaning that was tied up in your job has just vanished. And so we see the futility of that. And his, you know, we certainly have a modern application to, you know, whatever we do, somebody else is going to come behind us and they're going to have it all. You know, imagine having a fortune amassed and you don't have a living heir. Who gets it all? The government. You know, you spent your lifetime being wise, using your smarts and your advantages and your opportunities, and you made a bunch of money and you piled it up. And at the end, you die, just like the poor man who didn't do any of those things, and the government gets it. So each of these things, you know, can produce this kind of empty feeling for us. And I think what he's doing is he's bringing them out. And our hope is that towards the end, he's going to have some answers for us. I want to share a quote from Pascal with you. And the quote says this. He's talking about diversion again. So he says, the only thing that consoles us for our miseries is diversion. And yet it is the greatest of our miseries. For it is that above all which prevents us from thinking about ourselves and leads us imperceptibly to destruction. But for we should be bored, and boredom would drive us to seek some more solid means of escape. But diversion passes our time and brings us imperceptibly to our death. And so everyone has their choice diversion. He's gone through 3 in this passage, which are pretty common diversions in our world. Pleasure, philosophy, ideas, we throw art in there as well, and then work. Those are 3 very common diversions that people use as a way of sort of ignoring the fact of how empty we are. I know for myself, sometimes it's easier to be busy than to be still. Because in being still, I'm forced to think through kind of those nagging internal monologue type questions. That sort of self-evaluation, processing of how is life going, where am I at, all those kind of things. That's much harder to do. Sometimes it's easier to just go, you know what, I'm going to go get, put my nose back to the grind and get some more work done, than sit there and think through how I'm feeling about all of those things. And I'm seeing some heads nod, so I'm assuming that's a common thing. There's a book I'm listening to. It's an audiobook on pastoral leadership called The Emotionally Healthy Pastor, or The Emotionally Healthy Leader, or something like that. And I can only listen to it for like a little bit each day. And at a certain point, I just don't have any more willpower to listen to it. I think, it's just easier not to listen to this than to listen to it. Anyway, okay. So let's look at his conclusions. This is in verses 24 to 26. And this is him wrapping up this section, and then he's going to shift gears for next week. In 24 to 26, he says, there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give it to the one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after the wind. So his summary statement may not seem that profound, but one of the themes of wisdom, the applied wisdom, not his cynical side of kind of deconstructing things, but his applied wisdom tends to center around what are those small gifts, those simple gifts that God gives us to enjoy in the midst of our toil. So he seems to just he's kind of broken down. He's gone on this experiment from here to here to here. They've all failed and fallen flat, and now he wants to just kind of give up and go, well, I've just accepted that life is this burden that we must bear. That's kind of the impression that I get from his talking about it. In fact, he actually says that in the section on work, where he talks about how he hates his life. So he's kind of accepted that all of this is meaningless and there's nothing he can do. It's like a train going down the track and the brakes are out and it's on a downhill grade, and it's just, you ride it or you get off. Those are your two options. And so he goes, well, what then is the meaning? And one of the nuggets, and this is one of several that he's going to kind of punctuate his treatise with, is that a man can do nothing better than eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. This too, I see, is from the hand of God. And so he sees those simple enjoyments. I know right now is a time of lots of stress and anxiety for many people, mostly because it's such an unknown. I don't know that there's been a time in global history to this degree where a plague has caused so much, economic damage. This has not been the deadliest plague, but I think the fact that it's impacting our global markets are so interconnected in today's world, it has a much greater impact, I would say, socially than some of the other plagues that have happened. So we're all living in a different environment than we're used to living in. And this can cause us a lot of stress, anxiety, fear, worry. Somebody texted me the other day and said, "Hey, I'm going into depression. Can you pray for me?" So, even in my own home, a couple of my children have had moments where they've cried because, birthday parties are getting canceled and other fun events. The pool's not going to open, and all these different things. As time is progressing, they're seeing more and more how it is that this is going to continue to impact their day-to-day life. So one thing that we do is we say, well, what are those simple gifts that we can be thankful for? So let me just throw that question to you, since Solomon is saying, here's the sum of it all. You know what? For all your hard work, at least enjoy a good meal every now and then. What is that simple gift that you can enjoy, or that you are enjoying right now?
On Easter Sunday, I decided that for lunch, I would go to the Hickory Barn and have barbecue. I haven't eaten out in weeks. I think I'm in the 4th week now of my personally staying home. They were closed. It's a family business and they weren't open. I had to delay my pleasure until Tuesday, but I had the barbecue and it was wonderful.
Yep.
And I also had pecan pie.
Hey, that sounds good. All right, someone else. What's a simple pleasure that you've enjoyed since COVID's happened?
I've enjoyed, I'm usually stuck in an office every day, all day. And so I've enjoyed being at home. I can just go sit out in this beautiful weather occasionally. I'm usually so busy at the office, don't even have time to go outside and take a walk. Or I have a window and I can look out there, but so just going outside for a few minutes every day and just enjoying the beautiful weather has just been wonderful.
I think for me, it's been not being able to get together with the people that we get together once a week with and play games and fellowship and stuff. I miss that.
One of the things I've really enjoyed, normally with my work schedule, I get up and I do my Bible reading and then finish getting ready, run off to the office and start mainlining coffee when I get there. But since I haven't been leaving the office, I get up in the morning, make a pot of coffee, and then read the Bible while I'm drinking coffee, which is just exquisite.
That's awesome.
So if Jeff were to write Ecclesiastes, it would be, and I plied my heart with coffee.
Right.
But this too is vanity. What has been drunk will need to be drunk again.
For me, it's been actually being able to get to do some reading. I've with work and getting home and kind of being exhausted physically or mentally, getting the chance to be home and be able to read much more. Just in general, like I think I've read like 4 books this month, and I haven't done anything like that since school. And so just been enjoying that time to be able to read it casually, as and not like have to worry about time and the constraints of how long I can read for. So that's been cool.
I guess for me, I enjoyed less traffic whenever I go to work now. And then also the house is cleaner now because it's like Evelyn has time off, then she can clean up a bit at the house. It's been clean for like ever for the last 6 months. So it's pretty nice.
I think for me, it's been normally I'm at work majority of the day, well, pretty much all day. So now that I've been working at home, like I've been able to like actually go outside with my little girls. I have 2 2-year-olds. So those are times that like normally if I'm at work, like my wife would send me pictures of them being outside, and that was the closest that I can get to it. So now I actually get to be there and like in the present, which is like really cool for me.
For me, it's the different ways of connecting to people. Like, I've had phone conversations with people that I probably would never have talked to on the phone. And I hate talking on the phone, but now, since it's one of the only ways, since, we don't get to communicate in person, like, it's great. And, people that I very rarely get to talk to, or I've got like a Marco Polo group with some college friends that we're sending each other messages every single day just about what's going on in our days and what we can be praying about for each other and things like that. So I really enjoyed that, of finding the new ways to connect to each other and finding that I'm more intentional about connecting to people, and and I found that other people are more intentional about connecting with me as well.
What's up, DFS? Welcome back to the station.
All right, who hasn't gone?
Because I don't have to wake up at 6:30 for school, I get to sleep in every single day.
It's the simple pleasures.
Should take that one away, Brian.
I've gotten to do more baking. It's not necessarily good for us, but it's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been good.
It's been good. So good.
I would agree with just being outside more. I'm a teacher, and so I'm kind of trapped all day. And so it's nice to be able to get up and go outside or lay in my hammock or walk around the neighborhood or bike ride before it gets dark. So that's good.
I don't really have anything to say because my life hasn't changed much. I've always worked from home, so I've had all these pleasures. Things have actually gotten more busy at work for me, so I'm actually more busier than usual. So I can't say that I've enjoyed this time as much just because I don't have much time. But I mean, I have no complaints. I mean, actually having to work more, I feel like it's a blessing because I mean, obviously there are so many people who don't have work. So I'm happy about that. I mean, if that itself is a pleasure, then it is.
Yeah. Barbara, have you gone yet?
No, I was about to. I think just being able to walk out the front door and see woods and pasture and greenery out, not buildings and another house, and being here on the property of the house that I grew up in. That house is no longer here, but it's the same thing. And just kind of reliving some memories, you know, growing up here. I know for a fact the hill up behind the house has gotten steeper in the last 50 years because I tried to climb it a few weeks ago and it wasn't near as easy as it used to be, but I did climb it and, you know, had that opportunity to give it a try. And, you
I think
know,
the science behind that is the shifting tectonic plates are pushing things together.
it couldn't possibly be my age or my weight gain, could it? Of course not. But, you know, just doing some of those things as I did as a kid, no, they're not as easy as when I was a kid, but just remembering, you know, those memories. And some of my cousins that I have that live around here, and we're just sitting talking about things we used to do as a kid, you know, and family members and some that have gone before and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
just remembering where we've come from.
Yeah, I think for me, my simple pleasures have been a lot of similar to a lot of yours, you know, food, family, time. If you've been on Facebook or Instagram lately with us, you've noticed we've been doing a lot of bike riding as families. And so I used to do that as a ton when I was younger, and I'm getting back into that again. So that's been fun. It's also been a bit of vanity because, you know, you fall on the ground and wipe out and you think, what on earth am I doing at my age doing this? But still is fun. So we've enjoyed some good family times going on some bike rides. So that's been pretty good. I think in a lot of poor cultures, they actually understand this little nugget of wisdom very well. And so you'll see in many places where there's a lot of poverty that that people know how to appreciate a meal, even a simple meal, how that becomes such a momentous occasion where the family all sits down together and it kind of becomes almost its own sacred space and time. And I know, like, Cajun culture, where my family comes from, they're all rice farmers, or I mean, historically we're rice farmers. And so that's kind of the tradition of our food, is like, we might not have a lot, but we're going to enjoy what we have. We might not have expensive cuts of meat, but we're going to, you know, we'll take these little cut off parts and we'll make something that's better tasting than most things that will come out of a restaurant. And so I think in a lot of cultures that poverty is part of their social history, they typically actually understand this truth very well of, we don't have a lot and we can't make predictions about the future, and we don't have a lot of agency over what happens in our life. But you know what? We're sitting here as a family. We've got a meal in front of us. We have time together. So let's just enjoy it. This is what we have. I think, you know, as we struggle with meaning and purpose and everything like that, that's really more of a kind of a first world problem, I think. Not entirely, of course, not entirely. But I think as as humans become more affluent, they struggle with what does it all mean then? Because before you're too busy working, trying to make the ends meet to, have time to ponder questions like Solomon has the opportunity to ponder here. You just think, well, nobody's got time for that. I got to get back to work or the bills don't get paid. So I think as cultures grow a little bit more affluent, it's easy for us to struggle with, we're looking to, we don't appreciate the small pleasures because we have so much stuff. I was listening to Nick Offerman. He plays Ron Swanson on Parks and Rec. And he was talking about growing up, Christmas gifts. How a Christmas gift might be a new, like a thermos style mug, one of those old green Stanley thermoses, or it might be a new pair of work gloves, or it might be this. And then he started talking about, with the modern convenience of Amazon, he goes, as I'm writing this, I'm thinking about, I have 5 different unopened pairs of work gloves just sitting in the bottom of my truck. And he kind of goes through all these little things. He goes, if I want something now, I just hop on Amazon, 2 clicks later, I have it. Which means he was talking about making gifts for people. And so his recommendation was, instead of buying gifts in our culture, a more thoughtful thing is actually just make a gift. Even if it's terribly done, it's way more meaningful because people have more than they'll ever need already. So yeah, I think it's probably a good stopping point. We're a little bit over on time. So next week we will get into chapter 3, and I've really enjoyed our conversation tonight. I hope you have. Did the breakout rooms work okay for everybody? I couldn't get into all of them, but
yeah, I
my
thought
first
so.
one.
Yes.
Okay. Sometimes it's easier on Zoom calls to discuss in smaller groups than in big, huge groups. So let me close this in a quick word of prayer. God, we thank you for your many forms of goodness, down to the simple things like rain. We thank you for your goodness that we are too busy or too materialistic or too distracted to recognize or to thank you for. And so, Lord, we pray that you would just give us grateful hearts, give us eyes to see the many gifts that you send our way every day. God, I pray as we think about our own work callings, as we think about our own ways that we enjoy things with pleasure, our own ways of understanding things with wisdom, I pray that these would be centered on you and that you would help us to find purpose in them. As this in your name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
See you all next week.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay.
Good to see all of you.
Bye, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.